Greetings from Costa Rica. I hope you're doing well. My name is Matt Rosensteel, as always, broadcasting live from Playa Junquial, Guanacaste tonight. We have weekly Wednesday night Costa Rica chats with Costa Rica Matt, always live at 7 p.m. or slightly thereafter here from our office. Thank you very much for joining us. If you're live, if you're not live on this broadcast, thanks very much for watching this sometime in the future. Be sure to post your questions in the chat because every month in the last Wednesday night chat, I'm more than happy to go back over the questions we've received over the previous month and try and answer some of the things I didn't catch during the live broadcast. Our subject tonight is Costa Rica corporations. It's been more than a year since I touched on this subject. And as it just so happens, earlier today, I was sitting in the office of P&D Lawyers, my absolute top preferred law firm here in Guanacaste, talking to Evelyn, thank you very much, Evelyn, about the annual filings that are due for corporations here in Costa Rica, whether they're active or inactive. One of the things that you have to grow to love about Costa Rica is that there will always be plenty of paperwork to keep up with bureaucracy, whether you intend to be a fully fledged rental property or whether you're just trying to hold a property in your name. You need to be aware that in the next 24 days, a declaration, one of these filings is absolutely due for the Costa Rica government. And then another couple months after that, there will be another filing due, whether or not you're active or inactive as a corporation here. So I want to focus on exactly the practical logistical issues that it will take for foreigners buying property here in Costa Rica to keep their corporation legal. I want to go over the basics of corporations so that you can get an understanding of the vocabulary and really how you should be looking at this question. Third, I definitely want to touch on those filings and specifically what you need to keep your corporation legal and not slip into legal purgatory here in Costa Rica. Finally, I want to talk about what the heck a Costa Rica corporation might be good for. And that brings up the theme of this episode, which is death and taxes. And finally, I definitely want to go over the drawbacks, the cons of using a corporation to own property here in Costa Rica. I bet that by the time I'm done talking about all of the paperwork, the taxes, different things involved, you're going to have a pretty good idea as to what those cons of owning a corporation are here in Costa Rica. But as always here on Costa Rica Matt, we'll be absolutely sure to include some entertaining content as well. In particular, tonight, I have an absolutely monumental confession that very few people out there are gonna believe. It will really rock the world when I tell you exactly what this confession is. And I think a lot of people tonight will be 100% stunned by what I have to say about myself and this grand confession. Again, thank you very much for joining me tonight. We've got some regular viewers. We've got some people that bought me lunch the other day, the Redmonds. Thank you very much for joining us here live for our Wednesday night chat with Costa Rica Matt. I very much appreciate it. Without further ado, let's get started and please stay tuned. Our subject tonight is Costa Rica corporations, and more than anything, I want to give very practical advice to anybody who owns one or who is considering buying property here in Costa Rica through a corporation so that they can understand some of the pros and cons involved. If you haven't done so already, please, oh please, click that subscribe button or scroll through it on YouTube, on your TV app. However you can do it, please do subscribe to my channel so that you can stay posted. It will make me feel incrementally more self-important. And frankly, nothing is more important than my sense of self-worth. Before I get to talking about Costa Rica corporations tonight, I did want to make an absolute major confession, something that will forever change the Costa Rica real estate world, and something that I think will change a lot of your perspectives on me, Matt Rosensteel. And unfortunately, this confession is that I am not perfect. I can imagine everybody gasping out there in cyberspace. How could this be? He is not perfect, but every week he comes with informative content for Wednesday night live Costa Rica chats. But I guarantee you, I'm not perfect. And my main goal in talking about that tonight is to thank the many dozens of clients who over the years have accepted the fact that I'm not perfect. They've decided to work with me on real estate transactions over and over again. They've looked for my counsel. They've sought me out in a crowded field of real estate professionals. And then they've been loyal to me, even though I wasn't perfect. They've stuck by my side, even though I'm never able to respond as fast as one would hope. And many of these people out there, the ones that I'm thanking tonight, have decided to close real estate transactions with me, even though they realized I have human flaws. Again, I know it's incredible to believe. They've stuck by my side through thick and thin. We've arrived to the successful closing of real estate transactions, and they've accepted some of my faults because they understand that my expertise and my guidance and the way that I work with people here are worth tolerating some of those faults. So thank you very much to my clients, everybody out there who's accepted the fact that I can't always respond that quickly, or I can't always answer every single question. You've gone through with me despite that fact, and I really appreciate it. I want to play a really quick clip here to express this so that everyone can see what I'm talking about here. And whoops, that started in the middle. That was all to say thank you to our clients, and especially the ones that have stuck with us. Today, I was happy, or yesterday, to rip down that for sale sign in front of the Villas Venado condos, an example of clients who have been there and stuck with me and really appreciated what I had to offer. Without further ado, I want to start talking about Costa Rica corporations. And before I talk about what's urgent and pressing right now as of April 6th, I want to go over some basics for Costa Rica corporations. And first of all, let's go over some vocabulary that you will hear if you're interested in purchasing property through a Costa Rica corporation. First of all, the question is, do I need to have a Costa Rica corporation in order to own property? And absolutely the answer is no. You do not have to incorporate. It is your decision as somebody buying property here. Even if you have just a passport and zero residency status whatsoever. This is a decision based on the pros and cons of owning that property through a corporation. And if you've read somewhere online that it's absolutely 100% one way or the other, that source of information is not correct. There are big advantages and disadvantages to owning property through a corporation. And even if you're a foreigner, you don't have to feel obligated to having a corporation here as you would in some other countries. Now, there's one exception to that rule. Foreigners can purchase property here with zero problem as long as we're talking about any real estate that is not in that precious maritime zone where the government only allows leases. The maritime zone that I'm referring to stretches from 50 meters above the high tide line to 200 meters above that same line. So it's a stretch of 150 meters. In that area, absolutely, if you want to have a concession, if you want to lease land from the government, you're going to have to be sure to own a corporation, and there is no way around it. And I'm telling Daniel right now that he can actually take the evening off from here on out. In general, if you're looking at purchasing property here, there is no obligation for a foreigner to have a corporation. And it's very important because you would meet some real estate agents out there who would make it seem like this is the absolute only way. 11 years ago, when Anne-Marie and I bought property in our names, we disproved that. We owned our property completely in our private names without a corporation as the intermediary. And you'll see a lot of people who are also in that same boat. Now, let's talk about the two corporations you see here in Costa Rica and the vocabulary. You'll very frequently see either S.R.L. or S.A. as the two kinds of corporations you can have here. Simply put, and Gabriel Chavez, my preferred lawyer, gave me a great overview of these. He's going to be committed to an interview on my channel to explain the nuances further. But simply put, an S.A. or Sociedad Anónima is a corporation where the stock can be bought and sold very much like you'd see on a stock exchange, where if someone wants to sell their shares, they don't necessarily have to ask for the permission of the whole. And really, it's the form of legal ownership here that would set you up best to form a company that might have a lot of investors. If you're putting money into an investment where you think that down the road we might have 5, 6, 10, or 100 partners, for example, when Intel or when McDonald's, major multinational corporations, open a business here in Costa Rica, they use that SA format because it allows for easy sale and purchase of stock without necessarily going back to the entire board to get a decision as to whether or not you're allowed to sell your stock. Nowadays, you see many more foreigners owning their property through a different legal entity that is called an S.R.L. or Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada. Got that nice thick R in there to show off just how great my Spanish is. The Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada is a corporation that, instead of having a board of directors in a traditional sense, simply has gerentes or directors. And it's a situation where the corporation is set up much more for a small group of people to own an asset, or for a small group of people to manage a business. In other words, the shares of stock of an S.R.L., the Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada, are not as easily transferable to new parties as an S.A.R. Nowadays, you see that most foreigners are purchasing property, and if they're using a corporation, 90% of the time it's going to be through an S.R.L. And primarily they're doing this because an S.R.L. is an entity that does not incur double taxes in the US or Canada. In other words, actually, I should just limit that to the US. In the United States of America, if you own an S.R.L. in Costa Rica, and if you've paid your fair taxes on the income from that S.R.L., you don't have to then report that, you don't have to pay more taxes on that income to the United States government. Whereas with a Sociedad Anónima or an S.A.R., you would have to. So currently you see people using this S.R.L. format rather than S.A. And if you're looking at different properties available on the market here, you can easily tell the difference because, first of all, the S.R.L. and S.A. have different names. You will very often see that Sociedad Anónima or Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada are incorporated into the name of the owner of a property. And second of all, you could easily check the identification number where SAs will always start with 3-101 and SRLs will always start with 3-102. For your purposes, if you're considering investing right now in Costa Rica, and if at the end of this discussion you've decided a corporation is the right way to go, you will most likely find that currently your attorney is going to recommend the use of an S.R.L. simply because of how things have gone and very much the recognition that it's advantageous for foreigners. Next, let's go over the filings that are needed to keep Costa Rica corporations legal. We're at April 6th here right now with our live Costa Rica chat, which is, by the way, the 14th consecutive Costa Rica chat with Costa Rica Matt, making this even longer than the previous record holder for consecutive Costa Rica chats. Lost my train of thought there on it, trying to make a joke. But there are two filings right now that everybody who owns a corporation should be concerned about, and that you should make sure your attorney is handling on your behalf. First of all, we have one that's due by April 30th that is very important and interesting from an international money laundering standpoint, which is the Registry of Final Beneficiaries. This document, the registry of who owns stock in your company, is the elimination of the private benefit of owning property through a corporation. Many people would have previously said, I want to have my property through a corporation in Costa Rica so that I can maintain anonymity for tax authorities and to make sure that no one will really know who owns the property. By owning it through a corporation, you could assign a puppet board of directors, and in the National Registry here, you might never see the name of the real owner of a property. Well, it's important to understand that because of Costa Rica's very strong stance in terms of being against money laundering and trying to comply with international financial oversight legislation, Costa Rica has created this system where every single corporation in the country every year has to report to the central bank who the final beneficiaries of the corporation's earnings are. That means that you can no longer hide behind the anonymity of being a stockholder rather than a board member. And in fact, if the tax authorities from your home country, the US, Canada, Europe, etc., come knocking on the door of the Costa Rican government and they say, we have a record for John Smith that we think holds assets in your country, if they come with the right request for information, the Costa Rica government will now have on file who the shareholders of every corporation in the country are. And it's very much intended to participate in the international development scene where they want to be able to help the governments in those big economies come looking for people who have invested money as a means of sheltering it. So you should know when you're investing in Costa Rica, if you're bringing money down here to enjoy a higher quality of life and the spectacular beaches, 100% you can do that. If you're looking to shelter money here and try and really hide an investment from your home government, great, you can try, but only so long as the Costa Rica national government is not asked to supply information from the final beneficiaries registry as to what the heck you're doing down here. So every single year, and this year the deadline is April 30th, every corporation in Costa Rica has to file this document stating clearly who the final beneficiaries of their profits are. If your lawyer has not done this yet, be sure to call them and request politely that they handle this before April 30th. If you're managing your own corporation, then actually you're in a bit of a pickle and you need to figure this out, because the easiest way to file this document is through an online system using what's now called the firma digital, your digital signature. And actually, I think I might have mine here if I get a moment to root through my bag. Oh, actually, no, I left it at my lawyer's office this morning precisely to handle these documents for me. If you are in possession of a firma digital, absolutely, you can file this document, the final beneficiaries registration. If you don't have your digital signature here in Costa Rica, which I would assume is most of the foreigners who are watching and most of the foreigners who own property, you're going to have your lawyer do it for you. Now, here's even a slightly more difficult wrinkle to the situation. In order to file that document for you, your lawyer is going to have a nationally registered power of attorney, because in the digital system, the corporation as a legal entity will only give the power to different people to file these documents if there has been a link in the digital system between somebody else's ID and your corporation. So for example, if I knew how to use my firma digital, if I could get it working on this MacBook, if I had the capability to get online to file the document myself, I'd absolutely have that opportunity, because I have a firma digital and I am a legal representative of my corporation. If your lawyer is not currently listed as a legal representative, or if there's no power of attorney registered in the national database, they're not going to be able to do that for you using their own firma digital. So do be sure to look at the final beneficiaries registration that has to be done by April 30th. If you don't file on time, there are always penalties here in Costa Rica, and as you miss these filings, your corporation gets in more and more and more trouble with the government. If you've worked with a lawyer who is specifically focused on property, and if they were specifically focused on type of business that isn't necessarily maintaining corporations, you do have to expect that it might take you calling them up and ensuring that this gets filed in order for it to happen on behalf of your corporation. Unfortunately, nobody should just assume down here that their lawyer is 100% going to take care of every single document. And if you've had a lawyer that maybe you haven't spoken with in a couple of years, yes, you need to immediately reach out to them and say, by the way, our corporate registration of final beneficiaries is due in just a few weeks. I want to make sure you're taking care of that. Next, let's talk about a second urgent filing that everybody in the Costa Rica property ownership world will have to take care of. And that's the fact that the tax ministry, El Ministerio de Hacienda here in Costa Rica, is now requiring that every single corporation register with them, whether or not they're active or inactive. So if you have a corporation that simply holds your property, this inactive corporate status, even if you're not seeing a dime of rental income or you're using your corporation for anything resembling economic activity, by June 15th, you will absolutely have to file this declaration for the tax ministry or El Ministerio de Hacienda here in Costa Rica, which was not previously the case. You would have seen 10 years ago that people could hold property through a corporation and you didn't have to think about this whatsoever. But very much over the years, because of the Panama Papers, because of CAFTA, because of all kinds of international relationship building that Costa Rica has had with North America, they've made it harder for people to simply own property here and let it sit. And at the same time, the Costa Rica government has been consistently passing different kinds of taxes and fees that made it less attractive for you just to hold that property in an inactive corporation and really try to avoid the avoid the difficulties of filing annual income reports. That filing that you have to do by June 15th, even if you're inactive, essentially states the assets held by the corporation as well as the debts. Now, honestly, there are going to be very few expats who have to file information about the debts that their corporation holds, but essentially you have to be filing this in order to register your company now with the tax ministry. There's a further complication, and that is if the representative of your Costa Rica corporation, if the president or the top director is not actually a resident here, you're going to have to obtain a special number from the tax ministry called a NITE here in Costa Rica, or NITE, essentially to interface with the tax authority. Already I can tell I'm boring myself, and I apologize to everybody out there who's still watching. But basically, you've got in Costa Rica these different systems that don't necessarily overlap, where you have to understand the vocabulary involved. If you've got a legal representative of your corporation registered, your attorney is one of the directors, or your attorney is the resident agent, they should be able to log into the tax system, plug in their digital signature, and do these filings for you. If you don't have a legal resident as the legal representative of your corporation, you have to essentially set up your tax ID with Ministerio de Hacienda. And that tax ID, again, is called an NITE or NITE. So it's important, if you're just trying to fight through this system, and I tried it 3 years ago, log on and they ask for my NITE. And I tried my, passport number. I tried the ID number that I have. I tried my corporation's ID number. And this is a separate ID that is essentially, in the US, it would be your taxpayer ID. Here, it is your login, your, really the number that represents you before the tax ministry. And unfortunately, it might be not at all your ID, your passport, or your lawyer's ID, or any number associated with the business. It's basically a login that you have to establish with the tax ministry. That all sounds super complex and difficult and horrible, but the long story short is that these two filings, both the registry of final beneficiaries, which is due on April 30th again, and the registration for the tax ministry due by June 15th for even inactive corporations, they can absolutely be handled by your lawyer. And 100% I am recommending to everybody out there that rather than trying to figure this out and save a couple fees, you should absolutely talk to your lawyer and make sure that these are handled on behalf of your corporation, because the process of you figuring out how to get a digital signature, how to establish a tax ID, on and on and on, it's going to take you far more time and effort than it will to schedule a simple appointment with your attorney here, allow them to fully take over the process and really give them the access that they need in order to just make these filings on your behalf. Those fees might, they're all over the spectrum. I'm sure that corporate McDonald's charges more, or rather pays more to their attorney to register their annual filing of shareholders than a simple inactive corporation. Right now, you can expect to see a fee of about $150 for that registry of shareholders just to have your attorney handle it. That, of course, can be a number much higher or lower. And you can also see that the inactive corporation, that filing for the ministry of the tax ministry, would cost about the same. In addition to those filings, you will need to annually file tax returns whether or not your company is generating income and expenses. Just like the last two documents, you should turn this over to your lawyer and accountant to make your life easiest and happiest in Costa Rica. Every year, even if you've had zero income and zero expense that you hope to register to your inactive corporation, somebody needs to log in to the tax system here, get your corporation up on the menu, and file for you, even if it's 00000. Just a couple comments I recognize. Pat Redman and Crypto Cash. Yes, it does sound complicated. More than anything, I hope to educate people, and in this circumstance, really tell you that you just need to be cracking the whip behind your lawyers in order for them to take care of this on your behalf. Absolutely, Kathy. Definitely, you should remind Gabrielle. And I want to give a slight anecdote here. This new registration of inactive corporations is throwing lawyers into an absolute frenzy. My preferred law firm, again, P&D Lawyers, they manage 1,600 corporations for their clients across the years that they've done business in Tamarindo and the surrounding area. They have to establish this relationship in the tax system and file these documents for 1,600 different entities. Evelyn, the wonderful attorney with whom I was sitting this morning and talking specifically about our filings, is absolutely worried about the fact that, they have 1,600 entities that need to file these documents. They have 2 full-time staff people just working through this to try and make everybody's documents line up and get things filed by the 30th of April. And to be honest, P&D Lawyers, the firm in Tamarindo, is not anywhere near the biggest law firm in Costa Rica. There are huge law firms that are absolutely running and frantic to be able to file these documents on time. And it can never hurt to reach out to your attorney and make sure that they're handling things on your behalf. So let's move on to the pros and cons of owning a corporation in Costa Rica, or rather, owning property through a corporation. Because remember, you're not obligated to do so. You can choose to own titled property here in your own name. The pros, and the reason I titled this episode Death and Taxes, are literally that. You've got, first of all, in the event of death, if you own your property through a corporation here in Costa Rica, if something happens to you and you pass away unexpectedly, the process of probate, giving your property to your heirs, is going to be far more efficient if you've done so through a corporation versus your personal name. If you have 3 heirs that you've assigned as the beneficiaries for your property, and you own your property in your own name, then when you die, unfortunately, that property first has to be split into 3 chunks that your heirs agree to and sign off on. That alone can end up delaying things, the court processes to really separate a property into 3 separate ownership rights, really extends that probate process. If you own a corporation, the simplicity comes from the fact that with 3 beneficiaries, you can assign 1/3 of the shares of stock of your corporation to each beneficiary, and easily that asset is cut up and assigned to different beneficiaries when you pass away. So that's one of the primary reasons a lot of people investing here find a benefit in owning a corporation, despite the fact that you've got to file this, file the other, pay your taxes, on and on and on. It will make the process of your heirs inheriting the property easier in the event of something unfortunate. Second of all, I mentioned death and taxes, the only 2 certain things in life. Those taxes, your income, is actually legal. If you want to Airbnb a property, you're able as a corporation to earn income here in Costa Rica, managing the asset and generating rental income over time. Without a corporation, it's a very difficult situation where if you're not a permanent resident, you're not technically allowed to earn income here in Costa Rica. So how would you possibly own a property and Airbnb it and receive income in your own personal name in that situation? And that's why the corporation as a Costa Rica entity brings legitimacy to that income. The corporation is the owner of the property. It's the one receiving that rental income, and you as the administrator aren't necessarily in trouble because you're a foreigner with a, tourist visa. Because the property is held by a corporation, it's illegal to do business as a, income receiving entity here in the country. That also sets up another big pro for owning property through a corporation here, which is that your corporation is a legal object here in the country. And when it comes time for the owner of your property to do business here, when it comes time for you to update your cable subscription, or when it comes time for you to, let's say, get a better electrical transformer, do any kind of government process here, you have an entity on the ground operating that can do the business for you that would be extremely complicated if the owner of the property were simply listed as a foreigner, U.S. citizen with their passport or a Canadian citizen with theirs. That Costa Rica Corporation here operating legally can grant the power to do business, to update those subscriptions, to get better service, etc. You can grant that authority to somebody here in the country, and it's much easier to give somebody else the power to do business on behalf of the corporation and the property. If you own your Costa Rica property in your own name, in order to authorize somebody else to do business here on your behalf, you have to have a nationally confirmed and notarized power of attorney for that person, and it can be a significant process to get that approved. If you're in the US or Canada, in order to give somebody the power to act on your personal behalf in Costa Rica, you'll either have to go to a Costa Rica consulate in the US or Canada and sign that power of attorney before a real Costa Rica notary, or in some circumstances, you'll see that lawyers even have to fly to North America in order to witness a document, obtain the necessary power, and then come back to Costa Rica. And overall, it can be an enormous hassle. Again, that hassle comes if you own your property in your personal name versus a corporation, and the corporation can grant a proxy for X or Y person to go to the cable provider, and it's a simply signed document. It doesn't have to be done in front of a Costa Rica notary, either at a consulate or somebody getting off a plane. So that can be really the huge benefits of operating here through a corporation. If you pass away, it's easier to get through probate. If you want to generate income, it will be fully legal. And finally, if you need to assign a power of attorney to somebody here, it's far easier if you have a corporation. What are the cons of owning that corporation? Well, yeah, we've been talking about them the whole evening. We've got one filing due on April 30th, that is the registration of final beneficiaries. It's not a huge deal to take care of, but it is one of the obstacles. You also have that tax registration due by June 15th. You really have to be filing annual paperwork to keep your corporation legal. Above and beyond those annual filings, which include the registration of shareholders, your taxes, even if it's zero, both on the income and expense, and also being legal with a tax ministry as a registered entity, you're going to have to pay a couple of flat fees every year to own a corporation, whether you like it or not. First of all, there's a flat tax on corporations in Costa Rica that is approximately $115 for an inactive corporation, and I believe it's something like $240, or about twice as much if you're an active corporation. And that's regardless of whether your corporation just holds a property for you and that has zero activity, or if you're McDonald's. A flat tax that the Costa Rica government passed specifically to take advantage of the fact that thousands of corporations had been created to buy and sell properties. As a quick historical note, the reason that so many thousands of corporations were created 30, 40, 50 years ago was that at the time, people were able to buy and sell property based on the value of those shares of stock and pay taxes based on the value of those shares of stock rather than paying taxes based on the value of the underlying asset. So 30 years ago, you saw somebody with a 300-acre farm who wanted to sell to a foreigner. They would set up a corporation that owns those 300 acres, and they would sell only the shares of stock of that corporation to the buyer. In reporting to the government how much the transaction was worth and how much the transfer fees should be, they would say, well, I only sold the $10 worth of stock in this corporation, and that's all that I want to pay transfer taxes on. And you saw from the 80s, 90s, and into the aughts, even still today, you see attorneys who say, well, why don't you just transfer the shares of stock and you can pay transfer taxes based on the value of those shares? They are absolutely incorrect in saying that that is legal. You can pay taxes based on the value of shares of stock in Costa Rica, but there is absolutely a law. You're obligated to actually pay transfer taxes based on the value of the underlying assets. The Costa Rica government closed, that loophole. And currently, if somebody tells you that you can save money by transferring shares of stock rather than transferring the actual title of a property, they are not telling you the truth 100%. So, though that was a slight devolution into history there, and that's why you see today the absolute, most properties are held by corporations 100%, and it's a tradition that's maintained very strong roots here. And I'm not lying when I say there are Costa Rica public notaries that I've heard say we could all save taxes by just transferring the shares of stock, and they're incorrect. The value of the company's assets have to be accounted for when you transfer that property. And so if you want to obey the rules of the tax laws here in Costa Rica, you cannot save money by transferring the shares of stock rather than transferring the title of the property. That was all to say you've got these flat corporate taxes, either $120 or $250 per year that you have to pay for a corporation, whether you're active or inactive. You also have, generally speaking, a resident agent fee. You might see that this fee from some law firms is about $250. You might see that it's higher if your corporation is active. But the resident agent fee is part of what your lawyer will normally charge you, because if you're not a permanent resident currently, your corporation is legally required to have this resident agent as a registered member. Now, if we're looking at, for example, a document called a personería jurídica, or the certification of board of directors of an S.R.L. If one of those people is a permanent resident, it's no problem. The corporation doesn't necessarily need a resident agent, and they've got only those foreigners listed as their directors. But if, assuming that you're in the same shoes as a lot of people moving here and you don't have that permanent residency, you're legally required to have a resident agent, somebody who is here in the country and able to receive notifications, legal complaints, etc., regarding your corporation. That resident agent is going to be 9 times out of 10, or rather 99 times out of 100, it's going to be your attorney, but it's going to or incur additional fees. And like I mentioned, a resident agent fee here in the country might be $250, higher if you expect more responsibility from the lawyer, but it's yet another con, a drawback to owning a corporation here, which in the long story short are the numerous filings that you have to do every year, the registry of final beneficiaries, your tax return, even if you're inactive, and everything else the Costa Rican government is going to require. I don't see that anytime soon they're going to reduce the bureaucratic overhead in maintaining corporations. And over time, more than anything, they've been trying to really help out foreign governments in feeling secure. They're trying to comply with international trade treaties, especially CAFTA, to try and be available to provide as much information to foreign governments when they come, looking for, what their taxpayers are doing in foreign countries. And overall, you have to consider that if you're somebody who just wants to move to Costa Rica and own property here with as little hassle as possible, if you don't intend to rent the property, if you intend to be here and gain your residency, there are many, many reasons you should consider not owning through a corporation. If you plan to be out of the country and putting somebody else in charge of managing your property, if you want to earn rental income, then absolutely owning through a corporation is the absolute right path of action for you. Just be sure that your attorneys are keeping on top of these filings we've discussed tonight here on our weekly Costa Rica chat with Costa Rica Map. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, every month, at the end of the month, I'll take advantage of my last live chat to give an overview, go over the questions that I have seen come in through the comments. So do be sure to leave them here, whether you're watching live or non-live tomorrow. And we'll try and touch base with everybody who's been nice enough to give a question so far. Once again, I always appreciate everybody tuning in. If you haven't hit subscribe on my channel, I highly recommend you do, because few people can provide such stellar information week after week after week. I do want to mention that after 14 consecutive episodes, culminating with tonight's broadcast, next week is Easter week here in Costa Rica, Semana Santa, which is extremely important. You'll see everybody go on vacation, essentially starting with Ash Wednesday and culminating with Easter Sunday. And as a very fervent, passionate, die-hard believer in vacations, I'm going to go ahead and take next Wednesday, April 13th, as a break to spend a bit more time with my family while we're celebrating Semana Santa. If you have questions for me, please be sure to email me at matt@lat10realty.com. If you're considering moving to Costa Rica, I'm anxious to help you. Thank you again for joining me tonight. Here's a big cheers for everybody who sat through that extremely boring yet informative overview of Costa Rica corporations. Muchísimas gracias, buenas noches, and pura vida.